Shalom family and welcome back to the channel. I'm going to be starting a new series of questions and answers which has been inspired by many of the viewers on the channel who leave questions and comments about various teachings and also other things that come into play. And these things have always served as an edification to me in terms of learning from you, but also to consider doing other Bible studies or maybe considering questions that I haven't thought of before, and therefore doing a Bible study to get to the answer. So all praises to Yah that we're getting this community together to edify each other and also encourage each other to learn and learning together. So this series, as I say, will be ongoing throughout the course of time, in between other important messages that come to mind, and we will let the Most High lead in terms of how the direction we go with it, how many questions we'll be answering on each section, etc., etc. So please do put your questions and your comments to the videos like you always do, because that will inspire future content. It will also allow me to try and prioritize which questions are answered in terms of how many repeat questions that come in, because very often we get similar questions from similar people, some of which you will see today. So by Yah's grace, hopefully this will be edifying to you, and as I say, will help us to formulate future content as we go forward. So I want to start straight away because there's a few questions that I need to get into, and I want to spend a decent amount of time on each question. So jump straight into the video, and as I say, please do add your comments and questions which will form content for the next part 2 or part 3 even. Let's get into it. So we're going to get into some understanding, and as always I like to lay some foundation and look at some things that when we go through this, I'll call it a teaching because it is a teaching in certain areas, but as we go through it, there's certain key fundamental things I want you to keep in mind. And some of these things, what I class as principles for us to understand, are who is the overall beneficiary. So when we're looking at various questions and it's dealing with children of the Most High or those who believe in the Most High, and when it comes to a command, for example, or something the Most High has put in his word for us to do or not to do, I want you to consider who is the overall beneficiary, because very often we don't have that understanding, and that's why we don't get to the answer we need, because we might mistake who the overall beneficiary is. So think about that in terms of the questions that are going to be looked at today. Who is the overall beneficiary? And the second thing to remember as a principle is that a universal or spiritual law are there for anybody who applies them and to be rewarded by compliance. So whether you're a believer in the Most High or not, if you apply the Most High's laws, what I call spiritual laws or universal laws, anybody that applies them will be rewarded by their compliance, i.e. by following them. In other words, obedience is better than sacrifice. It's better to listen and do what the Most High says, to shamar unto his words, than to offer a sacrifice, because shamaring unto his word shows that you're being obedient. And if you go back to the first point, who is the overall beneficiary, you will see that the person applying the command is the beneficiary, not necessarily the one who is receiving it, but that will become more apparent as we go along. The Most High is not a respecter of person. Whosoever wills, whoever applies these things, believing in it or not, you will see the benefit. And that's why I say it's a spiritual or a universal law, a little bit like the law of gravity. The law of gravity does not look at the gender of the person applying it, or it does not look at the age of the person applying it, or whether that person is a person of the Most High or a person that is not of the Most High. If you jump up, at some point you are going to come back down. That is the law of gravity, and it applies to anyone. And the Most High's laws are very similar, that when they are applied, regardless of who applies it, the outcome to that person will be, if you're obedient to that law, then you will see the fruit of it. And these are some of the things we will see as we address these questions. And that goes straight in line with the third point, that you reap what you sow. Again, another universal or spiritual law. Whosoever applies this, they will benefit from it. What you sow is what you're going to reap from. And again, it goes to anybody who would follow the Most High's command. So as we use these to establish the principles for the foundation behind some of these question and answers, this will definitely help us get more understanding as we go along. Now in Acts 20 and 35, it reads, I have showed you all things, how that so labouring ye ought to support the weak, and remember the words of Master Yahusha, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And we would do well to remember that it is always more blessed to give than to receive. Now, incidentally, when you read this scripture in Acts 20 and 35, if you go through the Basura or the Gospels, you don't actually see somewhere where Yahusha said exactly that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. But he does say many things that allude to that. And this was the Apostle Shaul that was given this writing. So it's not something we see word for word verbatim that Yahusha said, but the principles of what he said certainly applies to this. And this we find as we look through this scripture here, where it says, but it shall not be so amongst you, but whosoever will be great amongst you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief amongst you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister and give his life as a ransom for many. Matthew 20, verses 26 through to 28. So the Son of Man did not come to be ministered to. He came to minister to us and to give his life as a ransom for many. And that's why we just read in Acts that it's more blessed to give than receive. Yahusha came to give his life. He didn't come to receive from us. He came to give us. And through his giving, it shows that he is more blessed than all. He is more blessed because he gave rather than received. And so as we're going through these questions and answers, we have to think of that, going back to the first principle. Who is the overall beneficiary? Who is the giver, if you will, and who is the receiver? These are some things that will help us through this lesson. And I want you to pay attention to this image that you see on screen, which is classed as a self-sustainable system. And you have here an image of agriculture, farming, where you have some natural resources, i.e. the solar panels and the wind turbines, which produce power. And the wind turbines rely on the wind, which is a natural element that we know at some point throughout the day there's going to be wind. And the solar panels rely on the sun. And again, we know at some point throughout the day there's going to be a certain amount of hours of light, the sunlight. And then you have electric water pumps, which is inside the building, and you have the electric combine harvesters, and they all run on electricity. And the electricity is generated through the natural resources like the wind and the sun that the solar panels and the wind turbines produce. This is called self-sustainable energy or renewable energy, and they come from a natural source. And why I point to this picture is because the Most High has designed his system to be exactly the same. The way how his laws work, it means that he actually doesn't need to get involved if we were to follow things according to the way how he set them. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, when everything was created, you see man came on the sixth day. Man was the last piece of the jigsaw, and that is because he wanted everything set up for us. He wanted there to be land, and for the sea to be separate from the land, and for the creatures of the sea to be present in the sea, and the creatures of the land to be present on the land, and for all the trees to have herb yielding plants, and for there to be a fruit in abundance. All these things were set up. So when mankind came, all mankind had to do was to maintain the system, meaning follow the Most High's commands. There wouldn't have been any real significant work for mankind to do because everything was in its order. And of course, we know that man fell, and when man fell, it obviously made the system break down. Even the nature of the animals, who all used to be herbivores, they all used to eat grass, they didn't used to attack each other. The natures of the animal changed, and the natures of the bushes started to grow thistles and thorns, and all these things happened. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be. But if we look at the Most High's laws, we are going to see some examples in the course of this lesson that these things are all self-sustainable. And if we applied them, i.e. if all the people in the Mishpachah applied them, then things would work like clockwork. And we would have a well-oiled machine. Everything would fit together and everything would play its part. That's how the Most High is with what he designs. It's always imperfection. And it's up to us to apply these principles, and we will see that these will help us with some of these questions and answers.